time, and they're probably not instincts scientifically. They're probably, you collect a lot of data and it processes somehow. But anyway, whatever it is, that as soon as I heard about that bombing, I was like, oh my God, I get a bad feeling about this one. It's too perfect. It's tax day. It's what they call Patriots Day. It's the Boston Marathon, this, hallowed family event, in Boston, the home of the American Revolution. And these bombs go up, and I say, oh boy, I got a bad feeling about this. So the next day, we were doing some fundraising because Who, What, Why is we don't take any corporate money. We're a nonprofit, so all the money comes from folks, regular people. And so I was talking to somebody who's involved with fundraising at a large university, and she was sort of going to give us some advice. And then she said, what do you think about that Boston bombing? Do you think there's more to the story? And I paused, and then I said, I do think there's more to the story. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, from my experience, I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that whoever did it or whoever we are told did it turns out to have more connections than they will admit, and that there may be some more awareness on the part of the authorities than they're going to admit. And this woman became so angry at me. I mean, she's like 92 years old, and she's still working, and she's a big, liberal Democrat, and she just began almost like shaking, and she kind of wanted us out of her place. And later we were downstairs meeting with her staff, and she came in and she said, we have other things to do. And, she wanted us out. It's very upsetting. This stuff is very, very upsetting. It causes cognitive dissonance, and particularly for people who are out there waving flags all the time and saying my country right or wrong and so on. This stuff just doesn't compute. It rubs like, fingernails on a chalkboard. And so people fight this stuff, and they call you names, or they just become furious. But I had a feeling, and then the next day nothing happened. You remember there was, very briefly, they said there was a Saudi guy they had held, and there was another guy who just disappeared. And by the way, they found his body in a river. That story was never followed up on. These are all people who were early mentioned in relation to the story. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, people are nervous. The media is doing its usual Malaysia Air style non-coverage. Nothing's going on. There's this weird thing on Wednesday. They suddenly announce that they have some suspects, and they're at the courthouse, and suddenly there's a bomb threat. And the courthouse is evacuated. Nothing ever comes of that. That was weird. Thursday, nothing's happening. And suddenly, 5 o'clock, whoop, there they are. Do you remember that? It just, if you had your TV on, suddenly, just out of nowhere, they go live to this press conference. And there's the head of the FBI office there. And suddenly, they got these images up there. Very incriminating images. People at a sporting event wearing hats and backpacks. Wow. But I sort of looked at that, and then I noticed that everybody else had hats and backpacks. I wasn't sure what it was about these guys, and they said, these are suspects. And I thought, well, why are they suspects? That's interesting. And they said, we don't know who they are. If anybody has any information, please come forward. That was 5 o'clock on Thursday. Later in the evening, we heard suddenly that a police officer had been shot. And I was like, oh my God, that's like the Kennedy assassination. Remember, they didn't know who had shot the president. Suddenly a police officer is shot, and then they identify, supposedly Oswald dropped his wallet. I mean, shot the guy and left his wallet and all his business cards so everybody could get in touch with him, And, this was sort of similar and kind of weird. Oh, and then a little later, carjacking. And then this guy escapes from the car, and the first thing he does is he says, this guy carjacked me. But it wasn't enough that he had a gun. I don't know about you, but if a guy has a gun and he carjacks me, I'm pretty much going to do whatever he wants. But apparently that wasn't enough, so the man had to say to him, do you know who I am? And he said, you're a guy with a gun. He said, no. I'm the Boston Marathon bomber. And he said, oh, I also just shot a police officer. And I thought, that is the weirdest darn thing, because honestly, you want the driver, if you're carjacking him, to just kind of be calm and not imagine a larger scenario, just that he wants to drive you and that's it. So that seemed very strange to me. And then we began looking at all these things. We looked at the shooting of this police officer. They made a huge big deal about the fact what a hero he was, a first responder, they say. A year later, they still say, it's all a lie, and it's disgraceful, and it really is tragic because obviously his family, I'm sure I can't talk to them about this because they want to be proud of him. Well, they should be proud of him because he was a good police officer at MIT, and the kids liked him, and that's enough. But he was not a hero in anything. This original story they put out, and if you ask people what happened, they say, oh, they shot him in a, he was trying to stop them. And, that's not what happened. It took days and weeks for this to come out, and almost nobody knows the real story. The real story is not only did he not confront them, he never saw them. And, they finally said, oh, well, he was sitting in his car on the street and they came along and they wanted to take his gun. Well, that's not what happened either. What happened was he was sitting in his car wedged between buildings on a completely dark campus. Now, why would they even be on the campus? You're fleeing for your lives, supposedly, the FBI showing your pictures, and you're going to go to a darkened campus to see if you can find a cop sitting between two darkened buildings, and then you're going to shoot him in the head and not take his gun? It doesn't make any sense. And so what we do at Who, What, Why is we just go, I like to say I went to the Colombo School of Journalism. I just go, I just don't quite, I can't see, I can't quite, why? It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so that didn't make any sense. And then this took me almost 9 months of looking at the story of the carjacking victim. By the way, who knows the name of the carjacking victim, since he's the one who was the recipient of the confession? Anybody know their names? His name? Danny? What's his last name? It's just Danny? What's your name? Devin, do you have a last name? Oh, what's Danny's? See, isn't that a little strange? We don't know Danny's last name. It actually turns out Danny is not his first name. Until recently, something weird is happening again. They never showed his face. He was always in shadow. They altered his voice, and they never told us who he was. So here's the guy who has the confession. The reason we think those two kids did it is because of him.
Chinese. And he used the Chinese to English translation app in your phone?
Yes.
It's kind of smart.
He was smart. He was very, careful.
Because otherwise, what did they show us? One guy got mad at me. This guy's a journalism professor who lives in Boston. He said, we know they did it. I said, well, how do you know it? He said, we saw them planting the bombs. So I said, you saw them planting the bombs? He said, it was all over TV. I said, wait a minute. What are you talking about? It turns out they never showed us them planting bombs. They've released some stills, and we'll have some articles about whether those stills are real or accurate and what they actually show. But it's just one thing after another. It's like they got an endless bag of tricks. And so you look at this stuff and you say, none of this adds up. This Danny, by the way, we found that he told different versions to different news organizations. In some, he was carjacked for 90 minutes, which is a really long time. It's a small area there in Boston. Where would you go for 90 minutes? Another account was 60 minutes, which is still pretty long. Another one was 30 minutes. And another one was, get this, that he was not carjacked at all. He actually told that to a news organization early on. He said that they just took his car. It's astonishing. This is the biggest story in the country, and nobody seems to know any of this stuff. And so we write about all this, and we found many, many more things about that story. It goes on and on and on. I mean, it's truly staggering. You can see photos that have been altered, statements that they made that make no sense. We're working on about 5 or 6 stories right now, so I don't want to say too much about them, but it's really unbelievable. And for an investigative journalist, this is almost like a dream story, because it's like an Easter egg hunt. The stuff that is wrong is everywhere. And yet nobody's looking at this. The media is not looking at this. And you could say, well, I could ask you who you like. Public radio, not looking at this. Liberal weekly and biweekly magazines, not looking at this. Websites that are progressive, blogs with a lot of traffic, not writing a word about any of this. There's a complete silence. And for anybody who lived in Weimar, Germany, or lived in Chile or Argentina or something, this is a very terrifying time, folks, because nobody's doing anything and nobody's saying anything. There is a conspiracy of silence. And so I do want to start wrapping up here, but what I'd like to say is this. It doesn't have to be that way. It does not have to be that way. This is interesting. I think you'll agree this is interesting stuff. People who like to, when you go on vacation and you see all those guys with the Marine stuff or whatever, and they're all reading thrillers about spies and the FBI and stuff like that, but it's all made up stuff. And you say, well, why not take the real stuff and pay some attention to it? Because it's really as or more interesting. It's pretty incredible. In fact, what I find amazing is that we are convinced we have very little free time. We have very little bandwidth for things outside ourselves. And so that time that we spend absorbing things, we're told to watch lots of movies with battles in them, whether it's hobgoblins battling on some amazing set that costs $200 million, or it's people battling for their lives on a ship going down or something like that. We watch all these and we don't think about why we spend so much time on it. Sports, football, which is simulated battle. The wars on TV, which is, again, a kind of simulated battle with the drone strikes and all that. And then just the gossip, the amount of time that we all spend on things like this Pistorius case. I mean, I'm sorry that he shot his girlfriend, but I never even heard of the guy until recently. We shouldn't really be spending that many hours debating, these horrible stories with a mother who drives her kids into the water because it's a tragedy. But, we didn't know him. We can't do anything about it. It's not a policy issue. These are isolated cases of tragedy. And you can fill up all your time. We can fill up all of our TV and everything else with that stuff because you can always find those kinds of things. And I don't think it's an accident. I think it's deliberate. It's easy. It's low-hanging fruit. It doesn't expose news organizations to high costs or any kind of risks, and they love it. So what we're trying to do is get folks to say, you know what, I'm going to watch less of that stuff and so on. And what I'm going to do is try to find a way to make this real stuff interesting to other people, and I'm going to share it. And so what I think all of you can do at a minimum, and this is really, really easy, is use social media to spread the word. And also just talk to people. Go to events and talk to people. Because if each of you regularly talks to 3 or 4 people and lets them know these things, and educate yourself, get armed with the specifics and tell the kind of stories I'm telling, people are going to find it interesting. I mean, I do it on my own level. Over the years, I had lunches with the people like Dan Rather and whatever, and they would just say, wow, you're just, you're blowing my mind. And now Dan tweets our stories, after what happened to him, but still, it takes him a while. We get notes privately. A guy at the Boston Globe sent me a note the other day praising something we had done. I mean, he'll never write a word, but at least he praises. So there's a food chain going on there, and I was describing us as we're sort of the phytoplankton of the information food chain. Everybody's got to eat the stuff, and it'll move its way up. So I'm going to stop with that, I guess, and I know we're going to do some Q&A.